So 8 years ago, Steve Donziger and a team of Ecuadorian lawyers won the largest human rights court judgment in history in a $9.5 billion verdict against the Chevron Corporation on behalf of indigenous and farmer plaintiffs in that country. Chevron now claims that the Ecuador verdict was achieved fraudulently and produced a witness who told a U.S. court that he knew about a bribe.
So the judge ruled in Chevron's favor, halting collection of the pollution fine in the U.S. from Chevron and actually placing Donziger on house arrest. Donziger faces a September 9th bench trial for contempt of court. Here to explain his side of the story against the oil giant is lawyer Steve Donziger himself. It's good to see you, Steve. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So, Steve, tell us about this case, the original judgment that you had in Ecuador, how Chevron appears to be, in your view, is retaliating against you, and how you somehow ended up under house arrest after winning this large judgment against Chevron Corporation.
Yeah, thank you. So I think the best way to understand this case, it's not that complicated. Chevron has tried to make it complicated so people don't understand it. But you can look at it in two basic parts. One is there was a case filed in Ecuador on behalf of indigenous groups and farmer communities against Chevron after Chevron, operating as Texaco, had dumped billions of gallons of toxic waste onto indigenous ancestral lands, leading to a massive outbreak of cancer and the abandonment of about 1,000 open-air toxic waste pits that were gouged out of the jungle that have completely poisoned a 1,500 square mile swath of Amazon rainforest with devastating effects on the local populations. It's really a humanitarian catastrophe. That lawsuit was filed by me and other lawyers, and we won that case in Ecuador in 2011. The case was in Ecuador at Chevron's request. They accepted jurisdiction there. They promised to pay any adverse judgment. But as the evidence mounted against them, and they knew they were going to lose, they started to come up with a strategy to attack the lawyers, attack me, and try to undermine the judgment. So they came back to the U.S. We won the case in 2011, by the way. It's been affirmed by 6 appellate courts in Ecuador and in Canada for enforcement purposes. But collaterally, they came back to New York and filed a racketeering lawsuit against me and all the 47 villagers who were on the lawsuit, as well as some other people. We were denied a jury. They paid a witness $2 million to come in and lie about a supposed bribe. There's zero corroborating evidence. The witness later admitted that under oath that he had lied before the judge, Judge Kaplan. The judge ruled against me and the clients, my clients in Ecuador. We kept pursuing the case in Canada, where we got a unanimous Supreme Court decision from Canada supporting the case. And ultimately, Judge Kaplan, who former tobacco industry lawyer, I think he has a record of bias in this case, ordered me to turn over my computer and cell phone to Chevron, which is an unheard of and I believe unconstitutional order that invades attorney-client privilege. I appealed that to the Second Circuit, the federal court in New York. It's still an appeal. And during the pendency of the appeal, he charged me with criminal contempt of court for not following an order that was on appeal. And he had me locked up. I'm the only lawyer in American history ever detained pre-trial on a criminal contempt charge. It's been now 13 months. I'm being denied a jury again. The case is being treated as a misdemeanor with a maximum sentence of 6 months in jail. Why am I in pretrial detention for 13 months when the maximum sentence is 6 months? I think this is a case of retaliation by Chevron. I think Chevron is orchestrating this. My prosecutor is not a government prosecutor. This is a very important point. She works for a private law firm that has Chevron as a client. The U.S. attorney, the SDNY in New York, rejected these charges. And the judge who charged me, Judge Kaplan, who's been overseeing this for many years, appointed this private law firm. So, this is an example, big picture, of a failure to get justice in the United States. And, people are seeing more and more of this in recent months with the Black Lives Matter movement. It is, I think this is an example of basically how our court system is really failing the vulnerable. And, it's not that there's personal attack on me, although it manifests that way. It's really, this is an attack on the idea of human rights law. Yeah. The idea that indigenous peoples in the rainforest have a right to get into court and hold a U.S. company accountable for a massive human rights violation in Ecuador that Texaco did over decades, that continues to this day, continues to kill people, and is causing a major humanitarian catastrophe. And by attacking me, they think they don't have to pay the judgment, and they can try to intimidate, every other human rights lawyer out there that might think about taking on this kind of case.
Yeah.
So, Steve, let me read the statement that Chevron provided actually to The Intercept based on their reporting on all of this that's going on. They said any jurisdiction that observes the rule of law should find the fraudulent Ecuadorian judgment to be illegitimate and unenforceable. It also said that Chevron will continue to work to hold the perpetrators of this fraud accountable for their actions, including Stephen Donziger, who's committed a litany of corrupt and illegal acts related to his Ecuadorian judicial fraud against Chevron. Obviously, you just rebutted those claims, but I wanted to ask you about Chevron's tactics outside of the legal system, because according to this Intercept reporting, they hired private investigators. They created a publication to smear you. They had you disbarred, your bank accounts frozen. I mean, talk about those extraordinary measures even outside of the legal system that you've been telling us about it.
Sure. I mean, I have been the target of probably the most abusive corporate attack of any lawyer in American history. I mean, there's a lot of human rights lawyers in the world suffering fates worse than mine. So I want to make that clear. But for the United States, this is unheard of. Basically, they have spied on me. They hired Kroll, which is a corporate investigations firm, to follow my family around for weeks. They have frozen my bank accounts. Judge Kaplan allowed them to do that. I've been sort of wiped off the grid financially. I'm dependent on others now for my very survival. I live with my wife and 14-year-old son in a small Manhattan apartment under house arrest during the pandemic. And they basically tried to disable my ability to advocate for my clients. I think Chevron has concluded that but for me, they wouldn't be facing this liability, but they're wrong. There's a lot of lawyers working on this. But they're very angry at me, because of this degree of accountability. And by the way, they can say what they want with their propaganda statements. But the reality is, in Ecuador, where they wanted the trial held, where they accepted jurisdiction, 4 courts have validated this judgment. In Canada, the Ontario Court of Appeals and the Supreme Court have validated the judgment for enforcement purposes. The only judge who declared it was a fraud was a U.S. judge who denied me a jury and relied on false witness testimony, which we're still challenging. But because Judge Kaplan and Chevron are so nervous that the Ecuador judgment will be enforced in other jurisdictions against their assets, countries like Canada, Australia, Indonesia, France, et cetera, they are trying to basically lock me up. They've taken my passport. Before this happened, I would travel to and work with lawyers in these other jurisdictions quite effectively. They want me detained, so I cannot do my job to enforce the judgment. They imposed an $800,000 bond on me for a misdemeanor, and I have no criminal record. That's higher than 3 of the 4 cops who killed George Floyd. Okay, and I'm a lawyer in New York who successfully won a case. And they are obviously putting me under 24/7 monitoring, and I haven't even had a trial yet. It's a very, very punitive, unprecedented corporate attack. And the craziest part is I'm being prosecuted by a private law firm that admitted that Chevron and many oil and gas industry entities are clients. They make their revenue, and they're being paid by the hour to prosecute me by taxpayers. So the big picture here, these types of corporate attacks using the legal system on activists, on lawyers, are increasing. Greenpeace has been attacked through the same methods. These types of attacks are happening in the United States as well as other countries, and they're designed to silence corporate accountability. They're designed to silence environmental justice lawyers and activists, and they're designed to obtain impunity for human rights violators. I mean, Chevron has perpetrated through Texaco a terrible crime. They don't even deny it. They just talk about Stephen Donziger. Right. The real story is what they did to the indigenous people of Ecuador, how literally hundreds, if not thousands of people have died of cancer. Nobody's paying attention to this. And Chevron has literally hired 60 law firms and 2,000 lawyers and spent probably $2 billion trying to attack me rather than cleaning up the environmental pollution they left in Ecuador. It's a travesty of justice.
Yeah, it's
a
insane.
tragedy, but it's really reflects, I think, a very dangerous trend that's happening in our society in the age of Donald Trump. We have to be very careful, and I really would ask people to pay attention to this and pay attention to my situation, because I need people to speak out and try to protect those of us who are being attacked.
Steve, we're very glad that we could shine a light on this. Just very quickly, where can people find out more about how to support you in your case?
Sure. So we have a website called makechevroncleanup.com where you can take action. You can also go to my Twitter. I do a lot of posting on the case at @Donziger. And I have a defense fund. We have costs, and people want to help in that regard. It's donzigerdefense.com, all one word. Thank you very much, guys. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Steve.
Steve. It's our pleasure.
Appreciate it.
I will have more rising for you after this.